started?
We're started. Let me get something to prove that we are started.
All right, well, let's pray, and we're going to pick up actually a little before where we ended last week, because I did check the video. I'm going to pick it up where the video ended. So a little bit of review on Genesis 15, Abraham and the covenant. All right, let's pray, and we'll get started. Thank you, Father, for the many blessings you've given us. Thank you for today and the ability to get different things accomplished in our lives as you've given us work or tasks to do. Thank you for your word, that we can study it and gain a greater understanding of you and how, what your character and nature is, how you desire us to live. Father, that we also see your mercy so often in our lives personally. Sometimes we take that for granted, and other times it becomes very obvious to us. It's your hand at work, and that's the only explanation we can see. Father, I'm grateful John Thomas's surgery on Monday has gone well, and from what I hear he's improving. And we pray for Winston in advance as he's looking for having surgery here in a couple of weeks. We look to you to be the great physician, for only you are the one who really can heal us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, we're going to pick it up from Genesis 15. That's where the video ended last week. And so we've gone through creation, the flood, dividing of people according to languages. They spread out around the world due to Babel. And then we got an introduction to Abraham and the covenant in chapter 12, land, people, and blessing. In chapter 15, that covenant is renewed or certified. I guess one way to put it is because God makes it a unilateral covenant by a ceremony that occurs. The Lord makes some promises. He's going to be Abraham's shield. He will have an heir from his own body, so it's not going to be somebody else, from his own body, not his servants. In 15:6, a crucial verse, then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness, or it was imputed to him as righteousness. That's quoted in Hebrews 8, James 2:23, Romans. This is a crucial theological point. Abraham is the father of the faithful because it comes back to this. This is God's character. He didn't require Abraham to do anything but believe. But of course, belief is going to have actions. Not perfect actions, because we're going to see that Abraham is going to show weakness of faith at times, and other times it's very strong. But the core is he actually does believe God. He's going to move forward in trust of God to do what God wants him to do. And God is going to be gracious to him as he strives to do that. A covenant is then certified, and the elements of the covenant is 1, God's going to be a shield. 2, he has promised land, a nation, and blessing. Verse 7. In 9 through 11, Abraham prepares a covenant sacrifice. So he takes an animal, and he cuts it in two, and he lays half here and half there. And when you cut a covenant, that's what they're referring to. You cut the animal. You cut it, and sometimes that language still creeps in. Some people refer to cutting a contract. I would think they print and sign a contract, but they sometimes still refer to as cutting. It goes back to this ancient stuff. And the idea is that you took this animal, it's been sacrificed, you have half here and half there, and the two people make an agreement to each other, promises to each other, a covenant with each other, and together they walk between the two animal halves. The idea being is that if you do not keep your part of the covenant, may it be unto you of what we just did to these animals. That becomes pretty serious, doesn't it? Well, if we did that now, a lot of lawyers would be out of work, wouldn't they? Because people would be serious about what they're doing, but people like to lie and cheat and all the rest. So now, in this case, Abraham does it. He prepares everything, and God puts Abraham to sleep. Abraham is out, and it is God alone that goes through the animals. It's a unilateral covenant. Only God can keep every aspect of this. Abraham's going to fail. We're going to see that as we look at his life. In verses 12 through 16 in chapter 15, there's an important prophecy concerning Egyptian captivity and return of descendants. That's long before it's going to happen. So it's going to be from when Jacob goes down to Egypt. There's 400 years before Moses leads them out. It's prophesied in advance, a couple generations earlier. And then there's a promised land, and who did that? He believed it. Romans. Let's go. All right, and then he's promised land, and it's described, the land. So everything in this blue-gray hash marks, that's what's promised to Abraham and his descendants. So where's modern Israel? Well, that's this area here. What belongs to Israel? Well, a little more than that, right? And yes, they will at some point have it. So people can argue with whatever they want to argue, but that's where it's going to be. There's one copy here of notes, I think, left. And there's copies there, too. All right, so we pass that over. Colin, you need a copy? If you need, you can download it from the internet if you want electronic version. I forgot to do that at the beginning. It's go to Grace Bible Church, study notes. All right, that's the website. That's where you'll find the notes. You can download it from a PDF. The PowerPoint is also there listed. Just click on it and you'll come up if you need it on electronic. Okay? Let me go back to where we were. There we go. Okay. So this is where the land that's promised to Abraham. And at some point, Israel will have all that. During the millennium, they're going to have all that land. That is what was promised to him. All right, so that's chapter 15. In chapter 16, so Abraham is told, yes, he's going to have a child from his own body. And now the years start going by, and he hasn't had a child yet. So what does he need to do? So his wife, Sarai, comes up with a plan. Tradition in those times was that if you had a slave and you couldn't have a child, you could have a child through the slave that would be your child. So that's her plan. So gives Hagar, her handmaiden, to Abraham. So she becomes pregnant by Abraham, but it would be considered her child. That's her plan. That's not God's plan. That's not the way he wanted to do it, but that's how they thought. So, but she became pregnant, and she becomes proud because basically is I'm more of a woman than you because look, I'm pregnant and you never had a child. So Sarai got mad at her. Abraham got blamed, and he shares some of the blame. And then they wanted to send away, but she went out. God spoke to her and sent her back, follow what your mistress says to do, and I'm going to bless your child, Ishmael. And so God gives promises to Ishmael. They're in verses 7 through 14. And Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. So Abram means exalted father. Okay? Abraham, father of many nations. So you can see he's going through life. He's 86 before he actually even has a child. Abram really doesn't fit so well, right? So now God's going to change his name to Abraham. And how many kids do you have? One. All right, well, God appears to him again when he's 99. So 13 years later. And now his name is changed to Abraham, father of a multitude. Again, how many children you got, Abraham? One. That doesn't look too promising, does it? But God knows what he's doing, and this is what's going to come about. Remember, the promise was land, people, and blessing. There is going to be a huge number of people coming from Abraham. And the land, we saw, is an everlasting possession. And circumcision is going to be the sign of this covenant that Abraham has of this blessing. All right? Now Sarai, which means my princess, her name is changed to Sarah, which means princess. And now he's told is she is going to bear a son. Now she is no spring chicken. Okay? She's actually Abraham's half-sister. She's younger, but she's too old to be having kids. So this is going to be a miracle. Abraham laughs and he pleads for Ishmael. I don't need to have one from Sarah. I've got a son. He's content. And he loves his son Ishmael. But God makes it plain. It's not going to be Ishmael. It's going to be the son through Sarah, through whom the promises are going to go. Isaac gets the covenant, not Ishmael. That's contrary to Islam, which wants to make it Ishmael. But it's very clear. It is Isaac who receives the covenant. Remember, I told you, the whole point of Genesis is Moses is writing after the Exodus. They're out in the wilderness, and he's explaining to them their origin, creation, how they got there, the choosing of who is going to be God's people. So Abraham, next Isaac. Isaac is going to have a covenant. But Ishmael is going to be a great nation, and he did. 12 tribes from Ishmael as well, and they became a very great nation. Arabic tribes went back to Ishmael. They went all over the place. Now in Genesis 18, while this is going on, tells him that he can return in a year, and that's when she's going to have a baby. But there's a theophany here. It's clear in this passage. It's a pre-incarnate manifestation of the Lord, along with two angels, to Abraham. They confirm Sarah's going to have this son. She laughs at the thought of it, but she's going to have it. How can she, as an old lady, have this child? It just doesn't make sense. Well, again, the Lord states, again, the future greatness and purpose, what it's all about. But he also decides to reveal to Abraham the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's very great, what he's planning to do. And Abraham's character comes out in this because he begins to interceding with the Lord to spare the city. Now, part of the reason is his nephew, Lot, is in Sodom. And he cares about his nephew, and yes, it's a wicked place, but he wants to spare this. So he starts with, if you can find, are there just 50 righteous people here, would you spare the city? And the Lord of Lorenz says, I will spare the city if there's just 50. And you know the story, he works it down. So it goes from 50 to 45 to 40 to 30 to 20 and finally to just 10. But why 10 people? Why does he stop at 10? Why not just get back to 1? I mean, he's got Lot there, right?
10 members.
Well, there's Lot and his wife. There's daughters at home, 2, so that's at least 2. There's sons, so that means there's at least 2 sons. Son-in-law married daughters, there's at least 2 of those. And sons-in-law there to marry the daughters. That's 2 more, the total is 10. So if Lot only affected his family, the city would be spared. But you know the story, that's not what happened. The wickedness of the Sodomites was great, it's explained clearly. It is not being inhospitable, lacking courtesy and hospitality as some. It is homosexuality, and of the worst kind. They want the angels. Lot has taken them into his home, and very important in the Near Eastern cultures, if you have some in your home, you are going to protect them. They are under your charge. You will do everything you can to provide for them, protect them. They're becoming your responsibility. It's the angels that end up protecting Lot and his family. As they step outside, they blind these folks that are banging on the door, and even after they're blinded, they're still groping to find the door because they're still after these 2 angels. These are horribly wicked, evil people. So Lot is told by the angels he needs to flee for his life, and now, get going. Well, The relatives think he's just jesting. They will not come. So Lot leaves early in the morning with just his wife and 2 daughters to escape. And God then destroys Sodom and Gomorrah just as he said he would. They don't go as far as they really should have. They go to a small city, but in the process, Lot's wife looks back. And the text says she becomes a pillar of salt. Now, I don't know what that means. But she's no longer alive. She's a crusty old lady now. She is dead. Okay? She's killed. Now, is that because she gets caught within it and she's covered with the stuff that God brings down on her? Is it since she becomes salt? Don't know. But that's what it says, a pillar of salt. She's dead. She is judged. She looks back. And they're told very specifically, do not look back. Keep going. Well, now the next section tells us the origin of Moab and Ammon, because it's not good. Moab and Ammon become enemies of Israel, and throughout their history they're going to be a constant problem. What's their origin? Moses is letting them know beforehand they're going to have problems, because this is the kind of people they are. They're wicked people. Why? Going to trace back to Moab in this case. The 2 daughters of Lot, they're off in the hills. They're thinking there are no men, everything's destroyed, all we have is our father, and somehow we've got to continue on the human race. So they get their father drunk, and each one, successive nights, gets pregnant by him, and that's how they have children. Result, we get Moab and Ammon, and both nations were nations of very perverted morals and false religious practices. That's their origin. In Genesis 20, Abraham migrates to the Negev, that's in the south near Gerar, where Abimelech is king, and he tells him that Sarah is his sister. Seems like he did this before, didn't he? So, as much as he trusts God, yet you can see here there's a weakness. And so he lies about it. Abimelech is warned by God about it, and so he ends up confronting Abraham about it, and the 2 of them make a covenant. Now, in the same way as when Abraham did this in Egypt, God still blesses him despite it, and he came away wealthy. Well, they make a good covenant, and Abraham does very well with this. So, this is one reason we know this is not written by men trying to promote how wonderful their ancestry is. I think I mentioned that before, because my brother's done all this work on my ancestry, and there's certain ones I love to talk about. I love to say I'm a direct descendant from John Knox. That's great, you know? I'm a direct descendant from William the Conqueror. But I don't like to say by which non-wife, because it wasn't any woman he was married to. That's not so good, right? So if you're going to tell your own story, you're going to tweak it to highlight the good stuff. You know, you're going to leave out the ones that aren't so good. In Scripture, it lays it all out. Here's the good things about Abraham, here's the bad things. He was a man of great faith, and yet also weakness of faith. Well, Isaac is finally born as prophesied. Sarah becomes upset at Ishmael, because Ishmael is now seen as a possible usurper. He's actually older. Maybe the covenant's going to end up with him, and he's going to take what she thinks only belongs to her son. Well, she's correct. It does only belong to Isaac, but not for the reason she's thinking, because it's by God's design. So Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. God protects them, and Ishmael will become a great nation. And it's detailed there, the tribes that come from him, that are now existing in the lands through which Moses and the Israelites are going to be going through. So this is their origin. This is where they came from. So God is still faithful, even when people are not. So he blesses Hagar and Ishmael, despite the sin that ended up creating Ishmael. It shouldn't have happened that way. So Abimelech makes a covenant with Abraham, who now is living in Beersheba. That's a little farther north than he was in Gerar. Not a whole lot, but it's the same general area, because they're fighting over water, and water's a big deal in Israel. And they now have a covenant. Now in Genesis 22 we have another very important chapter, and it's the offering of Isaac as a sacrifice, a burnt offering. Abraham is going to journey to Moriah. Mount Moriah is where the temple of in Jerusalem now sits. That's the very place. At that time was just a hill between hills, and it was a place that God told him to go and to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Now, he has the wood, they have fire. Remember, they don't have matches, they don't have strikers, they carry fire with them. So we've got fire is on a torch, he's got wood on the donkey, and he's got his son. Where's the animal? Isaac's wondering about that. So where's the lamb we're going to sacrifice? And Abraham's hope is God will provide. That's his answer to his son. Abraham follows through. He actually prepares his son for sacrifice. And as you read through the story, it's not until he's about to come down with the knife, he's got Isaac tied up on the altar, that the Lord intervenes, calls for him to stop, and then there's a ram caught in the thicket, and God does provide. Hebrews 11 makes a very strong point about this, that he was strong in faith, believing that if he sacrificed Isaac, God would have to raise him from the dead. Why? Because the promise was very specific through Isaac, no one else. So for God to keep his promise, if Abraham killed him, God would have to raise him from the dead to keep the promise. That was Abraham's faith. So here you see a strength of faith that is phenomenal. That is an incredible. That's why Hebrews marks that out as part of him being in the hall of faith. This is his belief. This is his trust of God. God will provide, and even if this happens, he's going to provide through resurrection. It's going to have to be made. So God provides it. The descendants of Abraham's brother is where an eventual bride is going to come in chapters 20 through 24. Okay, the substitution for the ram for Isaac is a type of what God is going to do in the future for us in Redeemer. He is the substitute sacrifice, so it's a picture of salvation in Christ in the future. So it's a very important chapter. Chapter 23, Sarah dies, 127. Abraham then purchased the caves of Machpelah, and that becomes the family plot. That's where they bury everyone. And now they have to find a wife for Isaac. So Abraham sends his servant with an oath to find a bride for Isaac from relatives and not from the Canaanites. Remember, the Canaanites are already cursed. He's already been told that what's going to happen to them eventually. Their wickedness is not reached that level yet, but he does not want him marrying the Canaanites. So he sends the servant back to his Haran, where his relatives are. That's where Abraham had moved. And the servant has this wonderful prayer about how to find a wife. How's he supposed to find this? What's he supposed to do? So he comes up with this elaborate thing of, God, here's my prayer, and the girl who will come out and water the camels, let that be the one. And he gets there immediately, and it turns out it's a relative. It's a cousin. And so Rebecca fills the prayer. He tells her all about it. She agrees to go. So Abraham, so now Isaac's married, he's back. Abraham ends up marrying again. He's an old guy. But he gets married again, and he has 6 more sons. And they are each given gifts sent away. The inheritance is reserved for Isaac. You can trace the sons of Keturah, and they became important tribes in the Middle East as well. But Isaac is the one who has the covenant, and only Isaac. So there's other children, but only Isaac. Abraham dies at 175, and he's buried alongside Sarah by Isaac and Ishmael. Now Rebecca, now we're going to trace Isaac, she's barren for 20 years. That's a long time. The promise is given to them, the covenant is them, so how is it going to continue on if she has no children? She's getting a little antsy about it. She's actually getting rude to her husband. But he prays for her, and she finally conceives, and she has twins. And the Lord reveals before they're born that the older is going to serve the younger. That's out of order for tradition. It's the older that gets the rights. But this one's like it's going to be the opposite before it happens. Now Esau, which means hairy, comes out first. He becomes a hunter. He's a man of the field. He's an impulsive fellow. Jacob, actually the name means one who takes by the heel, because remember the story. As Esau's being born, they're wrestling around the womb, and mom's not too happy about that. You can imagine that wouldn't be really comfortable. Jacob's got his hand on Esau's heel as they're being born. He is a peaceful fellow. He lives in tents, and he's quite a planner, a schemer. And several things come up. Genesis 25, Esau's hungry. He's impulsive. Jacob is cooking some stew. It's lentil stew. It's red looking. And the text there is more, it's like grunts from this fellow. You know, red stuff. Well, what will you give him for it? I'm going to die. So he sold his birthright for red stew. So he ends up with the name Edom as well, which means red. So this is his nature. He despised his birthright, Hebrews tells us. It isn't important to him. Just feeding himself for the moment is all that's important. So he sells it. Well, Isaac then moves to Beersheba, and God repeats the covenant with him. So it is now definitely, it's going to be Isaac. Now the covenant is given to him, so would Isaac need to steal it? Does it have to go through all that? No. And yet, that's what they're going to do. They're going to plan to usurp the blessing from Esau. So Isaac sends Esau out for game because he thinks he's dying. He's mostly blind, he can't see well, and he thinks, I'm coming to my end, so send my son out. I love game. He's going to get something for me, and I'll eat this, I'll give my blessing, and then I can die. It's a good thing. Isaac is not one of the great characters of Scripture. It's almost like Isaac is in there only so that you can get from Abraham to Jacob. That's kind of like what Isaac is. He's just a transition guy. So Rebekah hears about it, his mama, and Jacob is mama's boy, Esau is daddy's boy, and comes up with this plan to deceive Isaac in order to get the blessing for her favored one. There seems to be some problems with this family about favored children. So the elaborate scheme, and they get lamb, they put it around its neck and on his arm, so Jacob doesn't recognize that, Isaac doesn't recognize which son it is. He's wearing his brother's clothes, so he smells like the outdoors in the field. And Isaac goes along with it. Okay, you sound like Jacob, but you smell like Esau. So, okay, his mother, of course, knows how to cook for his dad, makes what he likes, and so he's satisfied and gives him the blessing. Now Esau comes in, as you recall the story, and finds out that the blessing's already been given, and the blessing it's gone. It's already been given away. And so the blessing reserved for him isn't really much of a blessing if you read through it. Basically it's like you're going to serve your brother. It doesn't seem like a great blessing. You're going to be a man for the field, you're going to break his yoke, but you're going to serve your brother. And so Esau is upset, he's mad. This time he didn't sell it himself, it was stolen from him. And so he is planning to kill his brother as soon as dad dies. Of course, Rebekah hears about it, and she comes up with a different scheme. And I'm going to send him away to our relatives because I don't want him taking a wife from any of these locals like the brother already has. So that becomes the excuse, and off sends Jacob away to Haran to get a wife. So as he's going, God makes the covenant with Jacob. So Abraham's covenant with Isaac, and now it's a covenant with Jacob. So these are very specific. So, remember the story, he has a dream of the angels ascending going back and forth, and that's when this covenant is made. Jacob's faith and understanding are very shallow at this point. There's not a whole lot there, but there is some. And that again demonstrates something about God. It is God who chooses, and not necessarily because of anything good in the person. That's important for us to remember. This is a quality that's still there. God chooses us despite us. That's how he chose Jacob. So Jacob gets there, long story short, he sees Rachel, this is the one, and makes this deal with his uncle. I'll work 7 years for you for her hand. And text says it was like nothing to him. He was so in love, 7 years passed quickly, and finally, well, Laban and the sister are both schemers. It's a family thing, and he schemed as well. For whatever reason, Leah had not got married yet, so I'm going to get rid of her first. Now, she's not as beautiful. She seems to have weak eyes, probably not, maybe not even as physically strong. So the text talk. They have the wedding ceremony. There's 7 days of feasting. And Jacob has been drinking too much. And he goes in, it's dark. Remember, they don't have electric lights. It's dark, and the text says, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. You think your mother was a schemer? Yeah, you try your uncle. So, he makes an agreement, I'll work for another 7 years. So really, he's worked 14 years for Rachel. Leah's sort of just thrown in there. But that's who we're still working for. So now he has 2 wives. Interesting enough, later on in the Mosaic Law, it talks about you can't marry 2 sisters. And all you have to do is look back on this and you can see why. It's not good. The rivalry just continues. Now Leah begins having children right away. 4 sons, bang, bang, bang. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel gives Bilhah to Jacob, following the same kind of thing that goes back to Sarah and Abraham. It's okay, I'm not having kids. I'll have kids through my maidservant. She ends up with 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. So, but they're not really hers, they're Bilhah's. Now, Leah isn't having kids, so she says, I'm going to do the same thing, so gives her maid, Zilpah, to Jacob, 2 sons from her, Gad and Asher. So there's a lot of kids coming really, really fast here in Jacob's household. Now Leah has 2 more sons and a daughter, Issachar, Zebulun, and then Dinah. Now in that culture, having sons is really important, so she should have been very exalted. How many children does Rachel have, the favored wife? 0. So she is complaining, and finally God relents and is gracious to her, and she bears a son, finally. And that's Joseph. So he's the youngest of these first 11. Now, Joseph is the favored one. Now remember, it's a family thing. There's favored ones already running in the history beforehand. Now, Jacob has increased his understanding and trust the Lord by then while he's in Haran. He's beginning to see God is favorable to him. He's certainly having lots of children. He's becoming a great man. And he agrees to work with Laban for another 6 years so that he actually has some kind of wealth. Wealth was accumulated in livestock. The more livestock, the wealthier worth. So he agrees to work for flocks. Now Laban does keep scheming and keeps changing the wages, but God blesses Jacob anyways. And so that by the time he leaves, and he leaves secretly because he does not trust his uncle anymore, he keeps changing the wages, and he's fearful actually that Laban might even just kill him and keep everything. So he leaves secretly, so he leaves Haran, and he's heading back down to what's going to become Israel, to Canaan. He gets to the north area, the northeast to be in modern Syria, and that's where Laban finally catches him and accuses of being foolish and stealing his idols, but they don't trust each other. Well, actually, Rachel did steal the idols. Shouldn't have done that, but also that's put in there to let them know is idolatry has been a problem and continues to be a problem. These little things in there is, again, Moses letting these people know where their problems are too. Some of these are long family history. They're prone to idolatry. Jacob proclaims God's protection on him, verse 42. They make a covenant at Mizpah. And the covenant is basically, I won't go past this to harm you, you don't come past this to harm me. That's the covenant. I know some people get these keychains and all sorts of little things where they get half and half, and oh, this is wonderful, it shows how much we love each other and think of you apart, but actually it's based on this. It's like we don't trust each other, so it's not really a romantic thing. So just in case you have one like I've been given. It's like, how do I respond to that? This is not romantic. So, don't you trust me? I trust you. I don't want to make a covenant like at Mizpah. I want to cross the line and let's get along fine with each other. Should trust each other, but they don't, and that's where they end up. So Laban goes home, Jacob continues on, but now he has to deal with his estranged brother. It's been 20 years. He doesn't know anything about Esau. Does he still hate him? And so he sends messengers ahead to prepare for any possible attack. And then he prays extensively about this. He wrestles with the angel. And that's when his name is changed to Israel. It's during this. He sends his family across the brook. He stays on one side. He wrestles with the angel. The angel touches his hip, puts it out of socket. The angel wins. You don't beat angels in wrestling, by the way. The angel wins, but he changed his name to Israel because he wrestled with God. He prevailed. But it was a wrestling because of what's going to happen. I have a covenant, but how's this going to work out? He's afraid of Esau. If you follow carefully what is the arranged is he arranges each group according to his priorities. So it's the children, it's the maidservant and their children, and then Leah, and the last one is, of course, Rachel and Joseph. And the idea is that if Esau starts attacking, he's got to get through all these all these flocks to get to what's really important to him, and maybe they could flee. So you can see where his priorities are. Jacob and Esau actually reconcile. This map shows where Esau would have been coming out from, this would have been a very well-watered plain, a lush area, and had come up the valley to meet him somewhere up in this area. This is the area where he'd had wrestled the angel. Well, he's still got to come up and come back down into where he needs to get to in Bethel. So he's got lots of flocks. It's going to take a while to do all this. All right, so he moves to Shechem, builds an altar there. He is a worshiper of God. So I'll go back one. So here's Shechem. This would be the Galilee region. Jerusalem is here. It'll be straight north along the ridge, and that's where Shechem is. Okay, that we'll see that again in Joshua. All right. All right, in Shechem, remember these are Canaanites. Their morals are already declining. And Shechem is named for the king's son, or the king's son has the name of a previous relative whose name is Shechem. But he rapes Dinah, the sister, and then he wants her for a wife. Now, you've got a large family, but you're pretty small in compared to a whole city. So Jacob's sons scheme somehow to get revenge. Now, Jacob does not take any action. He doesn't nothing. But his older sons start scheming about how they're going to get a revenge. And so what they end up doing is they make a deal with the men of Shechem, and you get circumcised so you're like us in that manner, and you know what, we'll intermarry. And the king's son was all for this. He's the one who convinced all the men, is let's do this, but also with this, you recognize that if we intermarry with them, all their wealth will become ours. So there's greed there as well. So they're circumcised, and while they can't really do anything because they're in a lot of pain, that's when Levi and Simeon go in and they slaughter them and loot the city. Now that gives Jacob a problem because now he's wondering, if the Canaanites hear about this, they're going to come and destroy us. But the Lord intervened and put a fear of them into the Canaanites so that they did not bother them at all. Very fearful that they would get destroyed. But Jacob moves down farther south from Shechem, goes down to Bethel, and also along the way he has the household idols removed and purify themselves. So you've had idols through this whole time. They're just now finally getting rid of them. So you can see there's an increasing faith on Jacob's part. Alright, so down to Bethel, and renews the covenant there. Now on the way to Hebron, we're going to continue down farther south, Rachel gives birth to Benjamin, but she dies right after birth, and she is buried in Bethlehem. Okay. Isaac then dies. He's 180 when he dies, and he's buried by Jacob and Esau. So the hope of the promised Redeemer then is very clear in Genesis. It's the line of Seth to Noah to Shem to Abram, who receives the covenant, and then it's very specific. It's to Isaac, not Ishmael, and Jacob, not Esau. So it's very, very specific. It's letting them know who they are and where they came from. Now the 37 through 50 is all about Joseph and how God intervenes to choose whom he wants, even when people are trying to do evil. And it also lets them know is the head of your tribe, they weren't nice people. So you need to learn to get along because God is still intervening and still will intervene in your lives. Favoritism causes jealousy. And Joseph is the favorite, and he gets the best of everything. And also being the youngest, he ends up being kind of a snitch. And older brothers really don't like it when little brothers tattle on them. I have a younger brother, I didn't like it, and my older brother didn't like it when I did to him. So it's something that little brothers tend to do, but older brothers don't like it. Now imagine, you've got 10 older brothers, and you're the favorite of Dad. This is a problem. Makes it worse, Joseph has these dreams, and in these dreams, one after the other, Joseph is the hero, and basically everybody's going to bow down to him. And his father understands it, and it's even going to be Jacob and his mother. It's like, I don't understand what this is, but that's not going to endear him to his brothers. Well, they're out tending sheep, and he sends Joseph to go find out how are things going with the sheep tending. So goes from Hebron up to Shechem, and then up to Dothan, still looking for them. He finally finds his brothers, and now they have their opportunity. Dad's a long ways away, maybe we get rid of this guy. At least some of the brothers are thinking that. So it was capture him, maybe to scare him to begin with, they throw him in a pit. Some are talking about let's murder him. And then opportunity. We have Ishmaelites, have a caravan going through, they're going to go down to Egypt. Let's make some profit on this. We don't even have to kill him, and they sell him. And it was Reuben, I believe it is, then comes, and he's not in the pit, and he's distraught. They had to come up with a plan. What are they going to tell Dad? So they get a goat, they slaughter it, they take the multicolored robe that had been Joseph's, put blood all over it, and lie to Dad. Joseph's dead. These are not nice brothers. All right? Meanwhile, Joseph goes down to Egypt. So their intent is evil. So all the way down to Egypt, Joseph goes. And ends up a slave in Potiphar's house. He's an Egyptian official. And God blesses him, and he ends up being second in command of the house. He has great integrity. He flees evil and any possible sin against God. And Potiphar's wife is after him and wants him to lay with her, and he refuses. He flees the house, but that is then used against him. She lies about him, and he gets thrown in prison. So this isn't looking good for Joseph. It's not being a really great life so far, right? Okay? You're a slave, now you finally get somewhere, and now you're in jail. Eventually, he works his way. He's in charge of the prisoners, because that's his character. God gives Joseph an ability to interpret dreams. Two of the people in jail have dreams. The chief baker, the cupbearer. One's good, one's bad. The cupbearer is a good dream. The baker, this isn't so good. He's going to die. And it happens, the Pharaoh's birthday, one is killed, the other one's restored. The predictions come true. Remember, he tells the cupbearer, remember me. But it's years go by. 2 years later, Pharaoh has two dreams, no one can interpret them. And along a lot of these cultures, Egyptians as well as the Babylonians later, dreams are very important. So they need to have this interpreted. No one can do it. That's when the cupbearer remembers. By the way, there's this guy in prison. He can do it. So they clean him all up. They bring him in front of him. And he tells Pharaoh the interpretation of this dream. God's intervention. If you can interpret this dream, then you got to be the wisest guy around here. And you already have a plan, so you're in charge. He's been second in the land. Imagine that, from jail to number 2 in the country. Wow. That's incredible, right? What do you think about that, John? That'd be pretty incredible. You had some friends. What if they were now the vice president, right?
Yes.
And just right like that. So he advised them, there's 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. Put someone in charge to store the grain. Joseph in charge of it, because none as discerning and wise as him says can do this. And that's what he ends up doing. So he ends up getting married. Pharaoh gives him a wife. He has 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's where they come up. Then you have the whole story. The famine finally comes, and Jacob sends his sons down to get some kind of food because there's not enough food. Joseph recognizes his brothers immediately, but they don't recognize him. Nor would you expect them to do so. They sold him, they don't even know if he's alive. If he is, he was sold as a slave. They certainly wouldn't expect him to be dressed as an Egyptian, second in command. So they don't recognize him. So, you know the story. They're given the grain, and as they're going out, one of them has his, they have their funds returned to them. And he says, you're lying to me, you're stealing from me, and so he puts one of the brothers in jail, Simeon, if I recall correctly, and the other brothers go back. Now what? How are we going to get this? They have to go back because, well, they need more food. Famine forced them to return. This time, Joseph said, you must bring Benjamin. So Benjamin comes down, much to his father's regret. This time, they don't understand. They're all seated in order. How does that happen? They still don't understand what's going on. It's a test. Benjamin is given 5 times as much. Why? It's a test for the other brothers. Have they learned anything? What is their character at this point? Are they going to treat Benjamin the same way they treated him? So he's setting it up so to see what's going to happen. Well, again, Joseph sets up another test. This time, it's going to see what kind of loyalty do they have to Benjamin. So Benjamin gets Joseph's cup, so he's the one who's put in jail. Judah is even pleading for him, but it's not going to work that way. They're grieved. How's this going to happen? Judah shows some integrity here. And you have to think this has got to be encouraging to Joseph, that Judah now is demonstrating, I will sacrifice myself. I love my father. I love my brother. I don't want to see this happen. He also overheard them talking about what they did to him. And he knew who was trying to protect him even back then. And so Judah explains the situation, offers himself as a substitute, and Joseph finally reveals who he is. It took a while for them to get it, that this is really Joseph. And then he explains, this is God's providence. They sold him as a slave. God sent him to preserve life. He sees the big picture. There's still 5 years of famine to come, and so he has them all come down to Egypt and live in the Delta area, which is the luscious place, and to tend their flocks there and all the rest. He's going to take care of them, and so they're going to survive. So Egypt is the means by which God is going to preserve the nation. Now that goes back to the promise made to Abraham. They're going to be in Egypt, but they're going to return. Okay, Joseph presented his 5 brothers to Pharaoh. Israel blessed Pharaoh when he came down, And he did provide for his brothers and their families in the years of famine. They were provided for the priest. Everything else ended up being sold for food and then ended up becoming Pharaoh's property. That's how the Pharaoh gained control and access of everything in Egypt. It goes back to Joseph. They sold it. Yet the family, his family in Goshen, Delta area, they were not slaves. They were not any. They had their own place, and they were provided for by Joseph. Everything else already had been sold to Pharaoh. Well, Israel's blessed and prophesied over each of the sons. Some important things there. Judah is the royal line. That's the most important prophecy in that section. Israel gives instructions about being buried with his fathers, dies at 147. He's embalmed. They mourn for 70 days. And then the whole shebang goes up to Canaan and buried with Abraham and Sarah. Joseph's brothers then fear he's going to take revenge. Dad's gone. Now what's he really going to do? He's the second most powerful guy in the land. Is he going to take revenge now? Dad's dead. So what's he going to do? So he reassures him. Genesis 50:20 is very important. You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good, to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Joseph's going to provide for them. So Joseph dies at 110. God's going to take care of them, going to bring them back to Canaan. So he's embalmed, and they promise that they will carry Joseph's bones back with them. And so there actually is a place there where pretty sure where Joseph's body was entombed, and there was some other little tombs there that where all these guys, brothers, would have been during that period. God keeps his promises, and that's Genesis. All right, so that's faster Genesis, but you see the flow. But now let me go back and reemphasize. The point of Genesis, to demonstrate to God's covenant people their origin in God's plan and his choosing of them. This is God's doing. And so this whole story is going to this point. God has chosen them. He is going to protect them. Little things along the way are going to now be filled in the Exodus. That's Moses' purpose in writing it. So it's extremely important because it gives us so much about origins of so many different things, where life came from, where everything came from, why God's dealing with sin, with the importance of the line of Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, and then the 12 sons. Okay? So we'll take a few minutes breaks, and then we'll get to Job. of Job.
Okay, go.
All right, we're going to look at the book of Job. And the reason we're going Genesis, Job is I'm going to try and go through this in a fairly roughly chronological sequence. And Job from, oh, I guess I should put the PowerPoint up.
I think it's the most earliest book ever written.
I don't know if it's, I mean, it's possible. All right, if you want to get the notes, again, just go to Old Testament Survey, and you can download the PDF for the notes for Job.
That's going to have the maps in it too?
This one I don't have any.
No, the one of Genesis.
The PowerPoint has all the maps. The PowerPoint is there as well as the notes. The
Yeah,
notes have
PowerPoint.
if you have something printed, those are in the PDF, and the PowerPoint of Genesis is also on the website at that same location.
Is this for Job 2?
Job 2.
The
You'll see them
PowerPoint?
listed, 00 for introduction, 01, 02, Old Testament Survey, Job. So it just lists out, you click on that, and it's going to bring you right to the PDF or the PowerPoint, and so you can load it onto your computer or smartphone or whatever you got, tablet, electronic device. Okay? The specific address is that, if you want to Job, but it's easier to go to the other site, just click and get the PDF and type all that stuff in. All right, why Job? Well, we don't know who the author is. But what Job went through got written down. Now, possibly it's Job much later in his life, but we don't really know. The date is uncertain. We know it's during the patriarchal period, so that's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, somewhere in that time frame. There's several things indicated. One, the length of Job's life. It's during that period when they're living about that long. Wealth is in livestock, so we know that's also true. He's the priest of his family, and he's offering sacrifices. That was what the patriarchs were doing. The Chaldeans at this point are still nomads, so we know they haven't settled in and formed their cities. So we know it's an earlier period. Sabaeans are also there, so it puts us in a time frame. So it's somewhere in that patriarchal period. That's why I'm putting Job next. So it probably predates Exodus. Okay? The theme is suffering and sovereignty. Or to outline it, you could say Jehovah is sovereign. Offer worship to God regardless of your circumstances. And bad circumstances are not always due to sin. So J-O-B, there's your a rough purpose statement. How about, I actually have some alliteration. Isn't that great? I'll ask you Sunday, see if you memorized it. All right, rough outline. You have a prologue, chapters 1 and 2, get you into what happened and why it happened. Then there are these series of dialogues with Job and his friends. There's 3 cycles of these dialogues. And then Elihu, a younger man, has a dialogue. And then God intervenes and has a dialogue with Job. And then there's an epilogue in chapter 42. What is the result of this? Job's repentance, rebuking of his friends and their restoration, and then Job's restoration of his wealth and family at the end of it. All right, key people: Job, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu. I'm told Bildad was a very short fellow because he's only shoe height. Yeah, that's pretty bad, isn't it? All right, I gave you a list. You're leaving? Is that bad?
Yeah.
All right, let me go back. On your notes, these are some key verses. Those things are bold, or things that I expect someone who's pursuing an elder to be familiar with. Not necessarily by chapter, but at least the concept that's in there. A lot of important concepts are here in Job, of our understanding of God. So let's go through an outline here. First, we start with Job's character and position in verses 1 through 5. And there's a man in the land of Uz, his name was Job. That man was blameless, upright, fearing God, turning away from evil. So 4 aspects of his character, and the last 2 are the reasons for the first 2. He's blameless, as means whole and complete, and therefore he's upright. He has moral integrity. So this is his character right from the begin with. And he's got 7 sons and 3 daughters, so there's a large family. And he's got 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. It says he's the greatest of the men of the East. He's extremely wealthy by the standards of that time. All right? The sons hold feasts. They rotate. There's 7, so every day there's feasting at somebody's house. A very close-knit family. Not sure why Dad's not and Mom aren't there, but the siblings, no sibling rivalry. That is a great thing. They like each other. They're always going to each other's houses. And then we find that Job loved his kids. We don't know much about the kids, but we know Job was always making intercession for them. He makes sacrifices on their behalf. This is a man of great integrity. So we then get into Satan's first assault, and Satan comes before the Lord, and he begins the assault. When he comes before the Lord, it is the Lord that points out Job to Satan. In fact, it keeps saying that in verse 6, the sons of God, which includes Satan also among them. We know from 38:7 that term in Job is used for angels. So they're before God. Verse 7, it's the Lord says to Satan, where have you come from? Been walking around the earth. Basically, he's been doing what he wants to do. Verse 8, the Lord says to Satan, have you considered Job? There's no one like him. Righteous, upright, integrity, doesn't turn to evil. And
so is that a different word than in Genesis when it talks about the sons of God?
yeah, because you have to interpret any phrases or terms according to how it's used in a particular book.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see sons of God used in a lot of different books, but context has to do with how you're going to interpret. Usually sons of God in Genesis, one reason they want to say it's angels because they go to Job and say, well, see, it's that way in Job, therefore it must be that way in Genesis. Not necessarily. In fact, probably not by the context. The only reason we'd say definitely sons of God here is because Job used it exactly that way in 38:7. That's a good question. So that's just a part of interpretation of anything. I must define my terms within the context, and that includes the book. How does this writer use that? Jumping to the New Testament, you'll see how does the Apostle John use the word believe. Seems to be a little different than some of the others. He talks about it a lot, and yet you have people that are given over to Satan are also described as those who believe. So what does he mean by that? So you have to, who's the writer, what's his context, that gives you the information you need. You also have is that Satan's among whoever these sons of God are. Okay? So it is the Lord that points him out, and Satan then is, Job doesn't fear God for nothing, and basically it comes down to this. The only reason he fears you and he's doing this is because, well, you've blessed his socks off, okay? It's the stuff you give him. That's why he's obeying you, not because he loves you. That becomes the challenge. So the Lord says to Satan, it's okay, I give him your power, just don't touch his body. Interesting. Now, remember, as we go through this, Job knows nothing of this, of these first 2 chapters. Nothing of it. This is something that comes out and revealed much later. So, Satan assault. First, the Sabaeans attack, and they steal his 300 oxen and 500 donkeys. They kill the servants. One guy is left to come report it. While he's reporting it, the next guy comes, and he talks about fire from heaven. That's the fire of God fell from heaven, burned up all the sheep, and all the other servants. I alone have survived to come tell you. As this guy's still talking, another guy comes up, and he said, the Chaldeans have attacked, and they have stolen your 3,000 camels, killed your servants. I alone am the only one left to come and tell you. Bang, bang, bang. And then, while he's still speaking, another servant comes up, and he tells him, your kids are dead. They're all in a house, they were feasting, a great wind came across the wilderness, struck the four corners of the house, it fell on the young people, and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Wow. That is incredible. And Job's response is equally incredible. He tears his robe, he shaves his head, he falls to the ground, and it says he worshipped. So, the first two things, signs of great grief. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Verse 22, through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. That's incredible. I think for any of us, if we had anything remotely serious, would we respond the same way? And the answer probably is no, because we had little puny things happen to us, and who do we want to blame immediately? God, well, you're not fair to me, you know. You let me have a flat tire on the way to work. It's your fault. Job had this happen. No sin. He doesn't blame God. Now again, from his perspective, one guy says it's the fire of God fell, and the other one says this wind came from nowhere. Those things look like they come from God, but he doesn't blame God. There is something about this man's character. Round 2. Second assault.
I'm sorry, he doesn't even know.
He knows nothing of this.
I,
Nothing of it. So Satan's before the Lord again, and this time, again, the Lord is the one who points him out to Satan. Where have you been? Da, 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 da. And have you considered Job? You've incited me against him. He's lost all of his wealth. He's lost his children. And he has not cursed me, because that was a challenge. Job will curse you to your face. He is not. Job has integrity. This is a man who loves me. And now Satan has skin for sin, anything for his skin. Hey, he's still doing pretty well because you have a hedge protection around him. He's not hurting yet. Okay, so I'll remove that. You can't take his life. Now understand, Satan is a wise being. He knows how to get to you, and he knows where you would hurt the most, and what you can tolerate, what you can't. So with Job, it becomes boils. We don't know exactly what they are, but we know he's scraping himself. He's sitting in ashes. He is absolutely miserable. Most boils, we will usually lance them and they'll leak. Well, we have an expert here who will tell us all about boils, right? What do you do with a boil? You haven't had to deal with that yet, huh?
Blisters, but we usually just leave them alone until they pop.
Okay, well, boils, they're nasty. They're hurtful because there's so much pressure on them. So, and there's a lot of things that can cause boils. We don't know what this one is, but he is one miserable dude. All right? Verse 9 and 10. Okay, the other thing that Satan left, then his wife said to him, left his wife, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Now that's common advice still given today. Better to die than to suffer. No, it's not. But that's the common idea. His wife was doing that. Job's response, you speak as a foolish woman. Incredible here. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his, now it's a little more specific, his lips. At this point, he's probably really struggling internally, but there's nothing from his lips. He's not going to blame God, curse God, say anything bad about it. He's not going to express it. Now, his friends arrive at the end of chapter 2, and they begin very well. They see Job. They don't even recognize him. They tear their robes. They throw dust over their heads in the sky. They sit on the ground, and for 7 days they were perfect. They said nothing. Because there's nothing they could say. How do you respond? And I always go to this when I'm telling people, you know, you get bad situations. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. It's just comforting. Just be there and show you grieving with them. You don't have to give them an answer. They did really well for 7 days. Now after 7 days, Job begins his lament. And it's a lament of absolute anguish and despair. And when you read through it, you have to understand that. This is a man who is simply venting out his emotion and how bad it is. He's actually, he knows it's bad. It's a cry of his grief. He's stricken to the core. And yet the question that comes out here in basic things lays a foundation for what's eventually going to happen and what he's going to end up being rebuked for. But there's still no sin from his lips at this point. He's trying to be careful, but now he is overcome with it, and he starts expressing his perspective as it is at this point. And his perspective is a simple one at this point. I wish I'd never been born. I wish I'd just died. I wish I'd never had to go through this. That's bad because it means that all the blessings he's had before, all the joys, are completely removed from him. He can't even remember these because he's so overwhelmed by it. He is turned inward and can't see past it at this point. That is total grief. That's the state he's in. Even the idea, I wish I had died, you know, that was a miscarriage. Well, you know what? Your parents had a lot of joy when you were born. So you'd want to remove that too. But that's how he's turned. It's an inward expression of just utter, total despair. And that's for the whole thing. Death is preferable at the moment. And wishes he would. And he's going to take his life. There's nowhere does he ever even insinuate that. So he never gets into the suicide idea. Yeah.
But even at that point, he's not blaming God. Right? He's just showing frustration through the pain that he's going.
I wish I'd never been born.
Right.
I wish I wasn't going through this. But it's out of that's going to come some things later on. But we're going to see he's egged on a lot too.
He already said, when he spoke to his wife and he said, shall we accept good blessings and adversity from God? So in his mind, does he acknowledge this? Somehow God's involved?
God's involved with this.
Yeah.
Right, so he understands the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
He may not have a clear idea, but he understands. God's hand is still here. I don't know how it's working out, but I will accept both. But here's just a cry of his soul. Some people argue for euthanasia, that the idea that life is not worth living if it's filled with suffering. Job is going down that road himself of, my life is so terrible, I wish I wasn't, I'd never been born, or a miscarriage, or God would just take my life. But there's no advocation of him anywhere, or anybody else in the book of Job, for euthanasia. It's sin. It's a terrible sin. The idea that, okay, remove the suffering, and okay, you're better. That's not true. Okay, for the Christian, yeah, to be absent bodies to be with Christ. But we're in God's hands, so we're going to be like Paul, I will remain as long as God wants me here to serve him, period. Whatever means I can do that. For the non-Christian, death just begins the suffering. We hear that so often, you know, they had terrible cancer, they had a lot of physical pain, etc. I'm glad they've now passed away because now they're not suffering. If they're not a Christian, the suffering just began. So we need to understand that. So this is what's going on. So it's just a venting of how horrible he feels. And you understand, that's what's in this first chapter. But that kicks off these dialogues. Now, all three of these guys are going to have to come up with something. They've been watching him for 7 days. He's now expressed themselves. If you were sitting there watching, the guy that you knew had the most integrity of anybody you ever knew. In fact, it begins that way. What Eliphaz says, verses 3 through 5, is just recounting. You've been the guy who's done all the good things. So think what it'd be like sitting there looking at this fellow and thinking about your own life. If this happened to him, what is possible in my life? That's going to come out. Each of them has a false assumption, slightly different false assumptions, based on different reasoning, but they're scared. They are frightened. In fact, that actually is stated later on about Eliphaz later, is you are afraid. You're looking, you are afraid. Because you've got to find some reason this happened to me so you can avoid it. And if you can't find that reason, you can't avoid it. It could happen to you. So that's where a lot of this dialogue starts coming through. So what you find in these dialogues is they will make these great statements, and a lot of them are true, misapplied, because they had nothing to do with Job. They're general truths, but they don't apply to Job. So they're partial truths. So Eliphaz, his false assumption there is in verse 7, or in 8. Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright destroyed? According to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. Here's my false assumption. And it's based on my own observations. Now, he's an older fellow, we'll find out later. So he's had a lot of years watching things, but that's his basis. Here's my experience, and you're going through terrible stuff. That doesn't happen to people who are good. Therefore, there must be something bad. And the rest of the argument is all about that. It's an effort to somehow do this. In verses 12 through 16, he even gives this idea that this kind of came from God. I had a word, it came in my ears, a vision. It's like, it's not just me. I think maybe God or an angel gave me this insight. Man, that's cruel. Don't believe it for a moment. This man is afraid. The key question, a valid question, 17, can mankind be just before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? The answer we know is no. But is Job going through what he's doing because he did something evil that God is punishing him for? The answer is no, but they don't know that. So they're assuming it. And out of that comes a descending of greater and greater accusations. And it gets bad here as it goes on. Chapter 5, Eliphaz concurs the trouble that comes upon the wicked. 6, the underlying assumption again. Affliction does not come from dust, neither does trouble sprout from the ground. It didn't come from nowhere. God is doing something, Job. This is from God, and it's because you've done something wrong. It's a punishment for sin. Verse 17, again, this assumption. How happy is the man whom God reproves, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. He inflicts pain, gives relief, his wounds, he wounds and his hands heal. So if we can get this right, he can heal you. It'll be all better, but we got to figure out what is this sin so that you can confess this and go to him. That's his idea. The false assumption is that innocent do not suffer. Innocent do suffer. Okay? They are suffering from things that they themselves did not cause. No one is innocent, but we suffer from things that were not our fault. We didn't cause it. Okay? And the bad things that came upon us are not because necessarily, sometimes they are, so our sin is directly tied to it, but sometimes it's not because of anything we've done. Period. Okay? So, he's laying this out. There's no comfort to Job here. Job's response, basically, verse 2, oh, that my vexation were actually weighed and laid in the balances together with my iniquity. Iniquity probably better calamity, all that I've gone through. And that becomes Job's theme throughout the rest of the dialogue. If only I could present it, because he would like to know too. He will plead, I wish I knew what my sin was. I can't find it. So you look for it, I'll look for it. If we can find it, great. But what do you do when you can't find anything? And this is what he sees as a trial, that God is afflicting him. He states that directly in chapter 6, verse 4.
His family's not even saying anything.
Only his wife is alive, and his wife told him to curse God and die.
Never hear of her again.
That was my monologue.
That's her monologue. Curse God and die. Okay?
She's out of the picture.
And yet we find here early on, verse 10, still my consolation, I rejoice in unsparing pain, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. He's holding to his integrity. I've not done, I can't think of anything that I've done. And then verse 11 through 13 basically is, you could summarize this essentially, what do you expect, Eliphaz? I'm not bronze, I'm not a rock, I'm not made of stone, I'm flesh and blood. Don't you understand what my lament is? What I'm going through? You're watching me. And then verse 21, he nails Eliphaz. Indeed, you have become now such. You see a terror and are afraid. You see me, you're afraid. And they're all afraid. But he even says, you teach me, I'll be silent. Show me how I've erred. There's a plea there. And he claims here his words are only the cry of his agony. His physical condition is bad. It's described in chapter 7 as nasty. He can't sleep. He's tossing and turning. My flesh is clothed with worms and crust of dirt. My skin hardens and runs. Ugh. Verse 11, a justification for his complaint. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And that's what he ends up doing. He expresses what he thinks God has done and is doing to him. But there's also verse 17, what is man that thou dost magnify him, that thou art concerned about him? He doesn't even understand now. Why would he even pay attention to us? So, he's still looking, though, that his hope is in God for redemption. Verse 21, why then dost thou not pardon my transgression, take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in dust, and thou wilt seek me, and I will not be. That's what he's looking for. He's this despair. Eliphaz has these false assumptions. He's truth without comfort, and Job is responding. He's got a confidence God. Eliphaz fears him. And next we get Bildad. Now, again, Bildad comes as a friend. He's seeking to sympathize, but he's overwhelmed by what he is seeing. He wants to help Job, but rather than seeking to comfort, like Eliphaz, he's searching for a solution that's going to end Job's predicament and hopefully give them some confidence that they'll not fall into the same problem. And so his responses are based on the premise that one, God rewards the good, and second, God's justice will not permit him to allow bad or evil to fall on the good. So he takes Job's complaint as an attack on God's justice. That's how he's going to react, and you see that. Verse 3, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert what is right? Well, Job wasn't saying that. But he's taking that, his complaint is that you must be then attacking God. And that's not what Job was doing. Verse 4, this one's actually cruel. Why did your sons die? If your sons sinned against them, then he delivered them into the power of their transgression. Basically, your sons got what they deserved. Ouch. Yeah. Verse 6, if you're pure and upright, and on and on. Again, it's the same assumption. And though he states it as a conditional clause, if this has happened, but it's coming off, it's an accusation. If you are pure, you're not pure, because look what you're going through. Where does he base this? Verse 8, okay? Eliphaz, here's my experience. Bildad, inquire of past generations. Here's traditions. Here's what we've learned through the generations. Human experience through a long period of time. This is my source of information. It becomes accusations against Job. Really, his effort at being comforting ends up being this at the end of the chapter, verse 21 and 22. If you heed my premise, become pure, become upright again, and then God's compassion will restore you to life. But you have to come clean about what you're doing wrong. You're evil. So again, there's a sense he wants to help, but how can you help when your assumptions are wrong? And so there is no help. It just becomes accusations. Job's response, verse 2, in truth I know this is so, but how can a man be right before God? I agree with your premise, but how can you be right with God? Now that's a scary thing too. How can you be right with God? that means they're in danger too, because they're not right with God. And so he starts pleading. He understands that that to dispute with God is foolish because God is wiser and stronger, verses 5 and following. And he gives a lot of analogies of God's strength, and his ways are beyond his own, verse 10. He recognizes God does whatever he wants. Who can question God, verse 12. You can't turn back his anger. And even if he was right, how would he answer, verse 15? And so Job's complaint continues. He feels hopeless. He feels abandoned by God, afflicted by God, and he doesn't know why or how to respond. That's verse 16. And again, verse 17, he bruises me with tempest, he multiplies my wounds without cause. The cause they're referring to punishment for sin. He said, I can't find a sin for which he's punishing me. If I could find it, great, help me find it, but I can't find it. And he's been racking himself. They sat there for 7 days trying to think about that. So he's not claiming that he's morally guiltless. He knows he's guilty, but of what? Okay, let's see. 23 is really a reflection of his own feelings, a scourge that's taken his family. He feels mocked and is despair by them. Job has lost everything, and yet the wicked are doing well. There's no judgment against them. Esau takes that same theme up in Psalm 73. So again, you find what's coming out here is just despair. He makes pleas in chapter 10 for his friends is to care about his life, to have compassion. He knows his complaint isn't right, but he's still not sure what to do. And so really he's appealing to God's omniscience to affirm that he's not guilty, so where's the deliverance? I can't find anything, so God, you know me. I'm seeking your deliverance. So you can see this, he's starting to generate some ideas here about what is going on. He can't find an answer. And so he's going to become more and more desperate, especially as the other guys keep attacking. But he's appealing to God, verses 8 forward, that he's a frail creature, and he's looking for God to give him life and loving kindness, because he has nowhere else to turn. But 13 through 14 and then down, it's bad, it's getting worse. He's in despair, he has little hope. And so again, he ends up at the end of this section, is he feels the grave offers more hope than life. So it's repeated this first lament. Now Zophar next comes on the scene. Zophar's false assumption there is in verse 11. For he knows false men, he sees iniquity without investigating. And an idiot will become intelligent when the foal of a wild donkey is born of a man. If you would direct your heart right and spread out your hand to him, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. Do not let wickedness dwell in your tents. Then indeed you could lift up your face without moral defect, and you'd be steadfast and not fear. So his assumption, you must be wicked, you must be harboring some kind of evil, otherwise you wouldn't have this problem. Same issue as the other ones, a wrong assumption. Job's response is he chides them, first of all, is that you're acting like, am I a joke to you? It's verse 2. I called on God and he used to answer me, and now look at me. Am I just some kind of joke to you now? But he speaks of God's power in verses 13 through 25, and then he says in chapter 13 and on that his friends basically are ashes. You're no help to me. There is no comfort you're bringing to me. And yet, in the midst of his despair, look at the hope that Job has for the future in 13:15. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Nevertheless, I will argue my ways before him. This also will be my salvation, for a godless man may not come before his presence. So he has a hope that extends beyond his despair in the midst of this. And he's even saying, if he slays me, that's still where my hope is. And that's how he's expressing himself. Utter despair, but where else can I turn? My only hope is God. But he makes a plea with God, verse 20, only two things do not do to me, then I will not hide from thy face. Remove thy hand from me, and do not let the dread of thee terrify me. So he understands to be in the presence of God is dreadful. At the same time, he doesn't want God's hands removed from him. Verse chapter 14, he speaks of the finality of death, and one reason why it would be a better situation for him, because then he's not going to have to deal with this stuff and it's over. And yet he knows it's not over, because verses 13 through 17 deal with resurrection. Look at verse 14. If a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my struggle I will wait until my change comes. Thou wilt call, I will answer thee, thou wilt long for the work of thy hands. He is expecting a change to be coming. So this is the first real mention of resurrection. So it's an old belief. It goes back to ancient times. So that's the first round. Job, in the midst of despair, still has hope in God. That's the only place he can go. He is looking forward for a future resurrection, but the resurrection is better than the present, so if he just died, then he can look forward to the resurrection. Second cycle. It's a rehash of the same thing. False accusations abound in this. He's guilty because the innocent are not supposed to suffer. That's verses 5. Your guilt teaches your own mouth condemns you. There's no compassion here. Again, as I said, I see these guys are desperate. They've got to find something in him, or they are subject to the same conditions. It could happen to them, and they've got to find a way to prevent that. Now, he also makes a statement in verse 10, the gray hair of the aged are among us, older than your father. So some of these guys are quite old. Probably Eliphaz, because he talks about my experience. He's had a long life, okay, generally. We look to older people they got experience, they know what they're talking about. Not always. And here's a case. He's making wrong assumptions. Look at verse 17. I will tell you, listen to me, and what I have seen I will also declare. What wise men have told and not concealed from their fathers. So it's based on his own experiences, that of men. And so again, he is condemning of Job. He's accusing him. There's got to be something. Now Job's response in this is, you guys are sorry comforters. 3, is there no limit to windy words? Chapter 16. Because he could speak the same way. Verses 6 and down, he talks about just the fact is, I'm shattered. What God has allowed in my life, and from the perspective he has, as God has done in his life, is he's shattered me. And yet, he can't find anything he's done wrong. He sees himself as innocent. And so he's still trusting God to be his witness. Verse 19, even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high. He's got an incredible understanding of God in the midst of being not knowing. Desperate, and yet he knows where hope is. Bildad then takes another shot at it in chapter 18. Again, the same false assumptions. Verses 5, indeed the light of the wicked goes out, the flame of his fire gives no light. So you must be wicked. Look what's happening to you. Verse 21, surely such are the dwellings of the wicked. This is the place of him who does not know God. What kind of comfort is that? Job's response again, he starts recounting the extent of his trial. Verses 7 through 19. There's violence, get no answer. There's no justice. I can't pass. My path is dark. He stripped my honor from me. He's removed the crown from my head. He breaks me down. He's uprooted my hope. Verse 13, he's removed my brothers. My relatives have failed. Verse 14, my friends have forgotten me. Verse 17, my breath is offensive to my wife. Supreme halitosis on the top of it all. And no certs. No banaka. Even young children despise me, verse 18. My associates abhor me, my bone clings to my skin and my flesh. He is in terrible shape. So he's crying out for compassion. Verse 21, pity me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you persecute me as God does? they're not satisfied with my flesh. You would hope they would listen. You guys are accusing me. You have no compassion. Verse 23 is interesting. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that with an iron stylus and lead they were engraved in rock forever. So it tells you about the manner of writing at that time. And that's what's amazing, is it did get written down. Job's belief in the resurrection, his trust of God, come out strong in verse 25 and 26. As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at last he will take his stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God, whom I myself shall behold, and whom my eyes shall see, and not another. What a great description of resurrection. My flesh is destroyed, but from my flesh I am going to see him. My eyes will see him. Now Zophar responds defensively at this. Chapter 20. And again, his assumptions deal with from what's been from old traditions. Verse 4, do you not know this from old? The establishment of the man on the earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short. The joy of the godless is momentary. He's still saying, there's an evil in you, Job. You're wicked. They haven't pointed anything out yet, but you must be wicked. Verse 29, this is the wicked man's portion from God, even the heritage decreed to him by God. So again, this false assumption, only the wicked have trials, therefore, Job, you must be wicked. Now, Job in chapter 21 just goes through and refutes their arguments against him. And it's point by point. You're claiming this, it's not true. You're claiming this, it's not true. You're claiming this, it's not true. Point by point, it's not true. The wicked actually do prosper. And he gives them lots of examples. Again, go back to Psalm 73. Esau sees the same things. They go down to the grave fat. So the manner of death, or the state of the person at death, does not always prove goodness or wickedness. So his whole premise is wrong, and he shows it. Well, third cycle, Eliphaz takes it up again. But again, it's the same premise. He hasn't changed any. Here's my experience. You must be wicked. People who are righteous don't do that. And so now, because of the false assumption, now he begins accusing Job from verses 5 and forward. Is not your wickedness great and your iniquities without end? Well, if it's really that great and without end, can you tell me one of them? But he just goes through it. And now it's become accusations. Now, in 21 through 30, there's good words here. There are partial truths, like verse 23. If you return to the Almighty, you'll be restored. If you remove unrighteousness far from your tent. Those are good things, that's true. But it doesn't apply to Job. So these false assumptions, they're platitudes with no comfort. Because of that, platitudes wrongly applied. Job then expresses in chapter 23 a longing for God and yet a confidence in him as well. He, at verse 10, even has a confidence. When he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. He's willing to be tried by God. Now, remember, gold is refined. It'll burn off the dross. He would look forward to that. And then he begins refuting Eliphaz's accusations, verse 11 and 12. And he's point blank. My foot has held fast his path. I have kept his way. I have not turned aside. I have not departed from the command of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. And he goes on in that vein. He refutes the assumptions of Eliphaz in chapter 24. And the assumption is, again, is that if you're wicked, you only get bad. And if you're righteous, you only get good. And that's not true. Pay attention to what's around you. Don't you observe this? So Bildad takes up another shot in chapter 25. But he makes some statements here are true, but they're no comfort to Job. Dominion and awe belong to him, to God, who establishes peace in his heights. Is there any number to his troops, and upon whom does his light not rise? How then can a man be just with God, or how can he be clean who is born of man? If even the moon has no brightness and stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man, that maggot, and the son of man, that worm? Okay, now what? How does that comfort? That doesn't help at all. Job already realizes that. Well, Job responds, and now he's getting really sarcastic. Verse 2, what a help you are to the weak, how you have saved the arm without strength. And he goes on that vein. Real sarcasm. And yet, Job agrees God is great, he's powerful. He's mysterious. Verse 7, he stretches out the north over empty space, he hangs the earth on nothing. Wow, we didn't find that out till the 20th century. And they knew it already. Or how about verse 10? He's inscribed a circle on the surface of the waters. Yeah, it's not the Bible that came up with flat earth. It was the Greeks. In the scriptures, we already knew it was circular. Chapter 27, Job attributes his troubles to God. As God lives, who's taken away my right, the Almighty has embittered my soul. But then he affirms his righteousness in verses 3 through 6. I'm holding fast my integrity. He affirms that he's not wicked, unjust, or ungodly by the very fact that he's crying out to God, because if he was wicked, he wouldn't be doing that. He'd be running away. That's verses 7 through 12. Verses 13 through 23, he agrees the godless are justly condemned. He has no problem with that. He agrees with them. For chapter 28, 1 through 11, he agrees God is over all earth's riches. He has no problem with that. Verses 12 through 22, he agrees man cannot buy or gain wisdom on his own. It's got to come from God. God knows wisdom. The fear of him is wisdom, verses 23 to the end. Verse 28. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, depart from evil's understanding. Can you recall any other places in Scripture where it says that? Yeah, Proverbs says it. Psalms say it as well. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Here it says it is wisdom. Departing from evil brings understanding. So chapters 29 through 31 is a closing lament. And it is a lament. Again, it's repeating a lot of the same things he had said before. It's an anguish of his soul, now aggravated by the fact he's been accused in 3 rounds. Okay? He's more agitated because they haven't found anything. There's nothing specific. They're just making general accusations. You must be wicked because you have bad things happen to you. He starts by recounting what it used to be like, verses 7 through 17. His position in the community was amazing. This is a righteous guy, doing righteous things, doing good things, a blessing to his community, taking in the orphan, taking care of those who had need, whatever it was. Verse 18 might indicate some pride that was there. He said, I shall die in my nest, I shall multiply the days of the sand, my root is spread out in the waters, dew lies all night in the branch, my glory is ever new with me, my bow is renewed in my hand. So he's like, everything's going great, this is getting better and better. That's where he thought he was. Maybe there's a little pride there. Verses 21 through 25, he states how people recognize the value of what Job's counsel would be. And then chapter 30, he begins, but here's my present condition, and he just recounts the disdain of those who are looking on him now. They looked at him as he was in a position of prestige before, now he is in the utter despair, and they're all looking down at him. The complete opposite from where he was. Chapter 31, he affirms his righteousness by specific examples. For example, that he's not lusty, he's not been false. And so he's questioned, why is God afflicting him? 31:1 is a great verse especially for guys. I made a covenant with my eyes, how then could I gaze at a virgin? You don't look. And he didn't. So he was a man of high integrity. No, he didn't have wandering eyes. Because he made a covenant with him. I'm not going to do that. No falsehood. He's not enticed by women. Verse 9. He listens to the claims of his slaves. If they have a complaint, he's going to listen to them. He'll do that. He provides for the poor. Verse 16 and following. Provides for the orphan. Verse 21. He doesn't put his confidence in his riches. Verse 24. He says, I don't gloat in my wealth, verse 25. There's no secret enticements that he's aware of in his heart, verse 27. He doesn't rejoice when his enemies have calamity or extinct, verse 29. Doesn't even have that. He's opened his doors for the traveler, 32. He's not hiding anything, verse 33. He's not covered his transgressions like Adam. Wow. He's not hiding things. He's being honest. He's not blaming somebody else. And so his plea, verses 35 through 38, is that God would hear and answer, because Job's hope, in the midst of all this, is still in God. In verse 38, his words are ended. Now Elihu gets started. Now Elihu has not said anything because he's younger, but he's angry. He's watched these cycles, and he sees that Job has a problem because he's justifying himself before God. How does man justify himself before God? And yet Job ended up doing that. Now part of that, he is justifying himself to these other guys who are accusing him, but it is putting him in a position, he's justifying himself before God. I am innocent, God's not fair. God shouldn't be doing this. That's where he ends up. Whether he intended or not, that's where he's ended up. We certainly understand he's certainly been egged on, but it's not right. And Eliphaz notices this. He's also angry at his three friends that they have found no answer, and yet they have condemned the man. You've not found anything he's done wrong, and yet you've condemned him. And so he's angry. He's waited out of respect for age, because there should be wisdom from age, and now, none of them refuted Job, verse 11. He's paid attention to all their arguments. And so he's going to express himself, but he begins in chapter 33, really with a plea to Job, is please listen to what I have to say, because I don't want to condemn you, I want to provide a means. How can we deal with this? I'm not challenging you. I want to reassure you, I'm not against you. I'm not like your other three friends. So it's a plea for him to listen. But he's going to be honest with him. So don't fear me, verse 7. So he repeats Job's defense and resulting accusations against God, and tells him, verse 12, is you're not right in this. God is greater than man. That becomes his premise. You shouldn't be saying things like this because God is greater than you. So you can't be making accusations on God. So why do you complain against him that he does not give an account for all his doings? Who are you to say that God should give you an account? Does God owe that to you? So that's going to be what he's running through here in his thing. And then he gives some reasons. God does what he does, and he knows what he's doing, and he's going to do something with it. Verse 17, it may be that he turns aside the man from his conduct to keep the man from pride. It could just be pride. And God humbles us. Certainly we are humble when things don't go the way we want. And we become very humble. It could be that. It could be to see that your hope is in God and just become more solemn. Verse 28, he's redeemed my soul from going to the pit. My life shall see the light. This is where our hope is. And let's face it, our hope is strongest in God when we have no other place to turn. Right? When I have no means by which I can do anything else, I can trust in God. Haven't done very well. Hit the PowerPoint, have I?
You're just having someone else do it now.
Yeah, I am. Why aren't you doing this for me, Brian?
Oh, yes, sorry.
I'm used to you doing this for me. You've made me lazy.
2 hours.
Oh, wait a minute. That's like Adam. I'm blaming you. This is not good. I need to learn the lesson here from Job. But he's pointing back is that only God's grace keeps men from suffering all the time. That's part of Elihu's argument here. And second, God uses suffering to further purify and sanctify even those that are apparently righteous. So suffering is not always a punishment for sin. This is part of his argument, and he's right. He sees what the others have not, and he recognizes it, so there can be comfort here. verse 32 is, again, he's trying to comfort Job, saying, I desire to justify you, Job. I'm not your enemy here. But he's also, again, chapter 34, he's point blank. Verse 5, Job has said, I'm righteous, but God has taken away my right. Should I lie concerning my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks of derision like water, who goes in the company with reports of iniquity, walks with wicked men? For he said, it profits man nothing when he's pleased with God. So this is the other thing he's rebuking with God. Because Job got into such a despair, and I didn't really point it out too well before. He is in such despair, he's saying, what good is my righteousness then, if this is what happens? And that's bad. Yeah. Why bother to be righteous if this is the end? And so he rebukes him on that very strongly, and because it's an implied accusation against God. It's not right. God does not do wickedness. Period. Verse 10, far be it from God to do wickedness, and from the Almighty to do wrong. He's the ruler of the universe, 16 through the end of the chapter. And he's impartial with all of his information. Who therefore can question his judgments? It's completely up to him. He is the ruler. That's his position. Who are you to question it? Now he, in 31 to the end of the chapter, he demonstrates that Job has been inconsistent. Shall he recompense on your terms because you've rejected it? For you must choose and not I. 35, Job speaks without knowledge, his words are without wisdom. Job ought to be tried to limit, because he answers like wicked men. He adds rebellion to his sin, he claps his hand among us, he multiplies his words against God. So on one hand, Job wants God to tell him what he's done wrong, and the other, he denies any wrongdoing and claims God has chastised him without cause. So he's reminding him, God is not bound to deal with Job according to what Job's wisdom is or wishes. And so he rightly, correctly rebukes Job. He's correct on this. Yes?
Some of the things that Elihu quotes Job, I feel like isn't exactly what Job said.
Yep.
Do you think that's just something we don't have recorded, or is it misrepresenting?
Well, he might be paraphrasing, or he may... Okay. Understand this, so let me back up something maybe I should have done at the beginning. Job is poetry. So here's all these discourses. I don't know that they'd be sitting around thinking all these things and thinking in poetry. So apparently it's something that's been written down after the fact in a form so it's easily memorized, because that's what the ancients would memorize this whole thing and be recounting it. So it may be there's other material or something else that's very specific that Job said, but a lot of it's summary as well. This is what you're doing, Job. These are the kinds of things you're claiming. And so he'll be summarizing it.
Okay.
That help?
Yes.
Okay. So there is a correct one. So the essence of Job's statement is that God has been indifferent to Job's righteousness, and Elihu brings back what Job has said in 7:20. We do not hurt God by our sin or help him by our righteousness. God is self-sufficient. He forgot something about God's character. Man's dependent. Wickedness hurts man. All right? Does not answer the case before him. So Elihu describes God's benevolence, which is given to Job as hope in chapter 36, because again, he's not trying to be Job's enemy, he's trying to encourage him. And so there's a lot of things he says here to encourage him. Verse 13. The godless in heart lay up anger, but they do not cry for help when he binds them. But Job has been doing this. So Job you're doing the right thing. I agree with you. He's pointing out, don't despair or reject what God is doing, even though God has not explained it. And we are often in that same position. We may be in despair, but don't give up on God just because you don't understand it. We will understand it by and by. We don't understand it now. Verse 18, don't long for the night, don't turn to evil because of these afflictions. 24, exalt his work. God is exalted, and we do not know him, but yet he's unsearchable. And then he talks about some of the things that God has done. Rain, clouds, thunder, things that we can't comprehend. Chapter 37, verse 5. the forces of winter, verses 6 through 13. And then final admonition really is, you do not understand what God has made, then you do not understand all that he does. You simply must fear him and wait for him. That becomes his ending argument. If you can't understand what he's made, how can you understand what he's doing? We only have one position as creatures.
Yeah.
Fear him and wait for him. It's going to have to be in his timing. Now it's interesting then what God does, because the next section is God answering. And I could spend an hour just on this because there's so much here, but it really is very simple. You're not the creator, Job. You're not like me. You're nothing like me. Who are you to question me? God does not give him an answer to his questions. He simply just presents, here is who I am, who are you? Job, you weren't there at creation, 38, 3 through 11. Job, you can't control a day, 12 through 15. Job, you do not know and cannot control the realm of the sea or of depth of the earth, verses 16 through 18. Job, you do not know and cannot control the day or night or the weather, down through verse 30. Job, you do not know, you cannot control the stars, the Pleiades, Orion, or the bear, verses 31 through 33. Job, you can't control the rain, verses 34 through 37. Job, you can't provide for the animals, verses 39 through 41. He continues on in chapter 39. You don't know all the animals. You don't know what they do, and you can't control the wild ones, whether it's mountain goats or deer, wild donkeys, swift donkey, the wild ox, ostriches, and he goes on about the ostrich. And the ostrich is a dumb bird, and you don't even know it. You don't understand the horse. You can use the horse, but guess who designed the horse? God did. You can't control the birds, Job. The hawk soars, the eagle mounts up. You can't do anything about that. And so in verse 40, or chapter 40, verse 1, the Lord said to Job, will you fault find or contend with the Almighty? Let him reprove who reproves God answer it. Now Job realizes at this point, I'm way out of my league. All right? I'm insignificant. What can I reply to thee? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, I will not answer it even twice. I will add no more. There's nothing I can say. But God's not done. Now notice in verse 6, the Lord answered out of the storm. Before it was a whirlwind. The tempest has increased. So this is, there's a crescendo going on. It's getting louder too. Okay, again, the basic problem is that you've tried to justify yourself before God, and that's not going to work. You've ended up accusing me and my character in doing so. So it's Job, you're incapable of being like God in power, majesty. You can't bring about justice, verses 9 through 13. You can't do any of that, Job. And then he concludes with two creatures that are incredible. Behemoth, verses 15 through 24. The description here, the best we can say is some sort of like an apatosaurus or something like that. It's this huge animal. It's got a tail like a cedar, so it's not a hippopotamus. I don't care what your NASB little note down there says. It's not a hippopotamus. Whoever came up with that is, I don't know, they must have been in the mainline denomination and hitting the booze or something, because it's a figment of their imagination. Read what it says. That's not a hippopotamus. Okay, then this Leviathan is like nothing we know of except speculation about dinosaur bones. Some sort of creature, what we know from mythologies. And remember, when a mythology is repeated all around the world in many different cultures, there's a truth behind it. And guess what in the Northern Hemisphere exists in almost every culture? Ancient culture. Fire-breathing dragons. All across the Northern Hemisphere. Marco Polo actually has a report that he saw them in China, and they were kept as pets. So you have to take it up with Marco Polo. Okay, he describes them. There's even a painting of them. So these things are all around the world. That's what's described here. Nothing like we know, and it's aquatic of some sort because it leaves a wake behind it. It snorts fire and billows smoke, and you can't attack it. In fact, my favorite description of this one about for men is, lay your hand on him, remember the battle, you will not do it again. Okay? Any kind of instrument of war they had couldn't do it. It had armor of such that it was airtight.
Yeah.
Shields, spears, arrows, clubs, nothing. It just laughs at you. No wonder the stories about people who can kill these things, they're heroes. It's an incredible instrument. And that's all God does, is here's the creatures I've made. Now, what would this mean to Job if he had not seen one? Nothing. Job would have had to have known exactly what he's talking about. So Job had to have seen one. Because in the time of the patriarchs, these things were still around. And what is Job left with? What can he say when God says, these are simply things I've created? That's it. So 42 is the epilogue. I know thou canst do all things, that no purpose of thine can be thwarted. Who is that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I declare that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear now, I will speak, I will ask thee, do thou instruct me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear. Now my eye sees thee. I retract, I repent, and dust as ashes. That's all we can come to as humans. I don't know what God is doing all the time. Sometimes he gives me some insight, a lot of times he doesn't. But I do know this, I can trust him. I can trust him the same way Job did. But I don't have to get into the accusations, although I'm much more prone to it than Job was. He's an incredible man, but he comes from repentance. The chapter goes on. Job's friends are rebuked by the Lord, and he has Job pray for them. They were in trouble, and it's a good thing Job prays for them, because they actually had some wickedness they could have been justly punished for. But they are forgiven and accepted as Job prays for them. And then Job is restored, and it says the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. And it's interesting how the twofold here. So he has double the amount of sheep, 14,000, double the amount of camels, 6,000, double the amount of oxen, 1,000, and double the amount of female donkeys, 1,000. So that's completely doubled. Then it says he has 7 sons and 3 daughters. 7 more sons, 3 daughters. Not 14 additional and 6. Why?
They're still alive. Because
the other ones that died in the house, they still exist. So he still has them. So he does have 14 sons and 3 daughters, 7 of whom have passed away, sons, and 3 daughters. But now he has 7 more and 3 more. And the names of the daughters are mentioned. Jemima, it means dove or dove-eyed. Keziah, also cassia, a reference to a perfume. And Corinne Hapuk is a paint horn or ointment box. It's a reference to cosmetics. So he also is given a long life. He lives 140 years after all of this. So that's why we put him in the patriarch. So he probably easily was, close to 200 years old. He had all those children, and they were prosperous and everything else. He easily could have been 200 years old. So that's what God did for Job. The lesson here, a simple one, but an important one, is we simply need to be following the advice given at the end. God is beyond us. We may not understand everything that's going on, but the innocent do suffer. It's not because of their sin. It could be somebody else's sin. It could be part of the curse of the world. Or you could just be, God is showing you off before Satan. I know, you're going to pray, God, don't do that with me, okay? You don't need to show me off before Satan. You don't know what God has planned or what he's doing. But you can trust him absolutely, no matter what your situation, because that's the character and nature of God. It's simply who he is. All right? Well, we went along. Sorry about that. I would say that's pretty good. Job in an hour and 5 minutes. Any questions?
In that last chapter, verse 7, with God, he tells Eliphaz that his wrath is kindled against them because they haven't spoken to him, of God, what was right. So he mischaracterized God. Was that mischaracterization is that God is obligated to bless you if you behave a certain way, like removes its sovereignty?
Yeah, but he's gonna behave the way that Eliphaz is claiming.
Yeah.
That just because you're good, you're going to get rewarded. If you're bad, you're going to get punished. But is that not the basis of almost every false religion? It's a lot of our folks come from the Catholic backgrounds. That's hard to get out of them with this idea as well. I'm good, so God should bless me. Or I think about our brothers and sisters in the charismatic movement. That's huge in them. Good, do this. In fact, give me money and God will bless you, right? Sowing and reaping. It's not right.
Yeah, we don't often look at it as a mischaracterization of God. God is offended. It's, you told a lie about me. It's not just how to get to me, which is the way we often look at it. That struck me the last time I read it.
Yeah, that's a very good insight. And we do need to be careful. We don't want to be Job's counselors. You may hear that once in a while. Don't be a Job's counselor. Be compassionate. Have pity on those who are going through things. When someone is venting their complaint, we can turn them back toward God and be compassionate toward them. These people got afraid, and that's why they started attacking. We don't help people by attacking them. Certainly we're going to go through something like this. Well, can you think of any sin that maybe is related to this? Because there are consequences of sin. All right, but there's still going to be, you need to turn to God. Your hope has to be in Him. Whether He gives you an answer even in this life or not. Because you may not have an answer in this life. We may get an answer eventually. We may see little bits and pieces of how God uses the adversity that we go through. But you may not even get that answer in this life. It may not be until heaven that we find out that what we went through was for somebody else's benefit. We don't know, but we can trust God who holds the big picture. All right, we'll pray so that Danny can go home and go to bed.
You mean Nicole and Jeff?
Yes. 15 minutes to bedtime.
Thank you, Father, for your blessings to us, and thank you for the encouragement that we do find in this particular book of Job. Your character is so far beyond us, and that we can have a hope in you that transcends everything that we experience. That we can cry out with Job when we don't understand things. Though you slay us, yet we will place our trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen.